World War II. Now, I've already mentioned I'm a little bit ahead of the syllabus. That's fine, I'll just spend more time perhaps on this chapter. World War II is a really popular subject these days, particularly on television, the History Channel, a lot of documentaries about it. A lot of talk said about it. As for the people who went through it, by now they're all very, very old. And World War II veterans are dying faster today than they did during the war itself. Have been for years. It's only a matter of a few more years before the last ones of them are gone. The story really begins with the Great Depression. And during the Great Depression, dictators were able to take over. Particularly, the dictators took over Spain and Germany, largely as a result of World War II. Now, of course, in Russia, the dictatorship had already taken over in 1917. And in Italy, a dictatorship took over long before the Depression started. Well, it actually, Mussolini took over Italy during what we call the forgotten about Depression, during the turmoil of the early 1920s. Now, the totalitarian state was something new in world history. The type of control Hitler had is control that had been impossible before. Like how? Well, simply this. Charlemagne, who took over much of Europe and had an empire almost as big as Hitler's, Charlemagne had to govern through counts. So he'd pick some man he liked, some man who seemed inspiring, and say, I'm going to make you count of Toulouse, or I'm going to make you the count of Anjou. You the count of this, you the count of... And so he'd send a count to each county, and they would govern. And of course, the counts might be hundreds of miles away. Well, in the case of Hitler, and Stalin also, and Mussolini, they had telephones and telegraphs, and automobiles, and tanks, and airplanes. So if they got wind of a disturbance going on in a certain part of the realm, some official there in that realm, all I had to do was get on the phone and call Adolf Hitler and say, Mr. Hitler, we're having trouble here. And Hitler would get on the phone to a general nearby and say, hey, you go and quell that disturbance right now, you do this and this. This gave Hitler more power. In the case of Charlemagne, I mean, if he heard of a disturbance, by the time he heard of it, the disturbance was already at least maybe a week or two old, maybe in some cases a couple of months old, and he'd have to spend days trying to figure out what to do about it, or there might be weeks where he'd send messengers back and forth how to deal with it. And then if he thought he had to send an army, that might take a whole year to get an army ready and go up. In the case of Hitler, he could handle a disturbance in a matter of minutes. He'd hear about it, get a general on the way. Again, Hitler had technology. He had the airplane, he had the telephone, the telegraph, the radio. That helped him. What if Hitler would have had the internet? Well, yeah, I mean, I store that. Really, the technology we have today could give a dictator authority that would even put Hitler to shame. A dictator with a computer could tell every parent that you must give your child a certain amount of allowance. And if you go to the supermarket, the dictator, the computer said, no, we don't think you have the means to buy this cell phone you want. You can't have it. They could control. I mean, well, the amount of control that could be exercised today could put Adolf Hitler to absolute shame. But let's talk about possibility. But you know, modern technology can work two ways. And in the case of Hitler, he made it work his way. We still have 5 or 6 minutes. Yeah, I think she didn't. I thought she was late. Anyway, all right. Leaving that. Another thing that really helped bring about the war, I think, was the attitude of pacifism. Pacifism. In other words, we must not have another war, so let's disarm. We must not have another war, so let's make sure we pursue peace at any price. And you get a man like Adolf Hitler getting control of one of the world's bigger countries, You think, hey, those decadent democracies aren't going to do anything to me. I can just go and take any country I want, and they're not going to try to stop me. One thing that causes wars is when you think the other side won't go to war. This has caused a lot of modern wars, thinking the other side is either too weak or does not have the will to fight. So you go in and try to take advantage. And there was a lot of studying going on about what caused wars, and they came to conclusions that wars were caused by two equally belligerent sides. In other words, there's an old saying, it takes two to make a conflict. Let me hasten to say, I don't really believe that. Sometimes all it takes is one person to make a conflict, not two. But they studied World War I, and they said, well, now, Serbia did this, and Austria did that, and Germany did that, and if either one of those sides would have wanted peace a little bit harder, they could have achieved it. It would have taken a little bit of give on just one side. Now, I'm going to get to it personal. My sister watched an argument develop between my parents one day, and she said, I'm just going to decide who's at fault in these arguments they're having. And at the end of the argument, she said, well, Dad said this, and Mom did that, and she came to the conclusion that they were both at fault. They were both equally at fault. And the argument would not have happened if just one of them would have solved his or her own problems. Any one of them could have stopped the argument, because neither one of them was any more right than the other. Now, folk, in a lot of cases, that's true. But sometimes you'll find yourself in life in a situation that you know you did not have any part in starting, that you're involved in a conflict you could not help. As Abraham Lincoln once said, the war is forced upon us. In the case of the World War II, you cannot say that both sides were equally belligerent. You had a case here where there was only one side that wanted the war, the other side didn't. And the one side that wanted the war forced the war on the other side that didn't. Now, if the other side did anything wrong, it was that they let Hitler get too powerful. They allowed too much to go on. But again, they were trying too hard to keep the peace at any price, because war had become so awful and so terrible, and they were afraid of it.